Okay, so let's dive right into this. You know that feeling, right? You get a brand new piece of tech, you install it perfectly, and nothing. It's just dead. It's got to be one of the most frustrating things ever. But what if I told you the culprit is actually this, invisible force, a silent killer that literally starves your devices of the power they need to live? Well, today, we are cracking that case.
All right, so let's set up the crime scene. Picture this. You've just installed a brand new, super expensive security lock. It's way out there, maybe 500 feet from its power source. You go to flip the switch, feeling pretty good about your work, and crickets, nothing. The device is fresh out of the box. You check the power supply, it's fine. So what on earth is going on? Well, the biggest clue is hiding in plain sight. It's in the wire itself.
Okay, so to solve this thing, we've got to learn to speak electricity's secret language. And to do that, we're going to unmask our three main suspects. These are the key players in literally every electrical circuit: voltage, current, and of course, resistance.
You know, the tricky thing is you can't see electricity, right? So to make sense of it, we're going to use a super simple but honestly really powerful analogy. Just think of water flowing through a pipe. If you can keep that picture in your head, I promise everything else is going to click into place. So let's break down our three suspects using this idea.
First up, we have voltage. In our water analogy, voltage is simply the pressure. It's the force, the oomph that's pushing all that electricity through the wire. It's why a 24-volt system has way more push, way more pressure than a 12-volt system. Simple as that.
All right, next on our list is current. We measure it in amps. In our pipe analogy, this is the flow. It's the actual amount, the volume of water moving through that pipe. And you'll find some devices are just super thirsty. A big maglock, for instance, needs a huge amount of flow to work, but then you have something like a card reader, and it just takes a little sip. It all depends on the device.
And that brings us to our third and final suspect, resistance. This is the bad guy in our story. It's the clog in the pipe. It's anything that's fighting against that flow of electricity. And here's the really crucial part, the thing most people miss. The wire itself creates resistance. So a really thin wire, that's like a skinny, kind of gunked up pipe. It creates a ton of resistance, and it makes it really, really hard for that current to push through.
So there you have it. We've met our suspects, but just knowing who they are isn't enough to crack this case. We need to understand the laws they're forced to obey, a couple of unbreakable rules of physics that control exactly how they all work together. Okay, the first golden rule is something called Ohm's law. Now don't worry, you don't need to be a math whiz or memorize the formula. Just get the relationship. It basically says that our three suspects, voltage, current, and resistance, are always tied together. But here's the key takeaway for our little mystery. If the resistance in a wire goes up, let's say because it's a really long, thin wire, then the voltage, that pressure we talked about, has to go down at the other end. That is our first huge clue. The second rule is the power formula, and this one's pretty straightforward. It's just how we figure out a device's total energy appetite. So anytime you see a device rated in watts, all that's telling you is the specific mix of voltage and current it needs to get the job done. Let's put this into a real-world example so you can see how it works. Say you've got a 30-watt PTZ camera and you're running it on a 48-volt system. How much current, how much flow does it actually need? Well, we just use that power formula. We take the watts, divide by the volts, and bam, there's your answer. Now you know exactly how many amps that camera is going to pull from the system.
So, we've established that resistance is the big problem, right? It's the clog. But where is it coming from? Well, it turns out our silent killer isn't working alone. It has an accomplice. And this accomplice has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Yep, it's the wire itself.
See, not all wires are created equal, not by a long shot. We measure how thick a wire is using a system called American Wire Gauge, or AWG for short. Think of it like this. An 18 AWG wire is nice and thick. It's like a 4-lane superhighway for electricity. It's got super low resistance, so everything just flows. But a 22 AWG wire? That's thin. That's like a 1-lane dirt road, creating a massive traffic jam for your electricity.
Now, here's the thing that trips everybody up, and it's kind of counterintuitive. With wire gauge, the smaller the number, the thicker the wire is. I know, it feels backwards, but an 18-gauge wire is actually way beefier than a 22-gauge wire. That's a really important point, so definitely keep that one in mind.
Okay, I think we have everything we need. We've gathered all the clues, we know our suspects, voltage, current, and resistance, we know the unbreakable laws that they have to follow, and we've unmasked the accomplice, the wire. So I think it's time. Let's go back to the crime scene and finally solve this thing once and for all.
Let's just quickly recap the facts of the case. So, We've got a magnetic lock. It absolutely needs 12 volts of that electrical pressure to even think about working. It's a long way away, 500 feet. And here's the kicker. It was hooked up with a thin 22 AGW wire. Remember, our one-lane dirt road.
All right, time to apply Ohm's law and see what's really happening. First, we need the total resistance. Now, remember, the electricity has to travel 500 feet to the lock and then 500 feet back to complete the circuit. So we're dealing with 1,000 feet of wire. And for that skinny 22-gauge wire, that works out to be about 16 ohms of resistance. We also know the lock itself draws about half an amp of current. So now we just multiply that current by the resistance,
And there it is. The answer is 8 volts. That is how much electrical pressure is completely lost. It's literally burned off as heat because it's fighting so hard to get through the resistance of that thin wire. 8 volts that never ever make it to the lock.
So let's do the final math. We started with a perfectly good 12 volts at the power supply, but we lost 8 of those volts just on the journey through the wire. That leaves only 4 volts actually arriving at a device that needs 12 volts just to wake up.
And case closed. The lock isn't broken at all. It's being starved to death. It doesn't have anywhere near enough pressure to do its job. The silent killer has a name. It's called voltage drop, and it was helped by its accomplice, that thin, high-resistance wire.
Okay, so we've identified the killer. We know how it works. The big question is, how do we stop it? Let's go over a few really practical, real-world solutions you can use to make sure this never, ever happens to you. So, there are really 3 main ways to beat voltage drop. The first one, and this is the most common fix, is just to use a thicker wire. Go for that 18 AW superhighway to lower the resistance. Simple. Second, if you can, just shorten the distance. Move the power supply closer to the device. Less wire, less resistance. And third, you can actually start with a higher voltage. For instance, use a 24-volt power supply. That way, even when you lose a few volts along the way, you still have plenty left over for the device to work.
And hey, let me give you a few extra pro tips from the field. If you're ever in a real pinch, you can take 2 spare thin wires and twist them together. This basically turns them into one thicker wire, and it'll cut your resistance down. Another thing, always add about a 25% buffer to your power supply calculations. Why? Because a lot of devices have this thing called inrush current, where they draw a huge spike of power the split second they turn on. And one last thing, for super long distances, AC power travels a lot more efficiently than DC power does.
So there you have it. Mystery solved. It was never a broken device, was it? It was just physics. A simple, predictable law that controls how electricity works. And that really leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? Now that you know exactly what to look for, what silent killers might be hiding in the wiring of your own home or your office, just quietly starving your electronics right now?